Jesus walks on water. After Jesus finished feeding the great multitude of people with the little boy's lunch, it was near the end of the day, and it soon would be dark. Jesus told his disciples to get into their boat and cross over to the other side of the lake while he got all the people started on their way home. Some were reluctant to leave because they wanted to make Jesus their king then and there. A man who could provide free meals like this was the very person they were looking for to be the king of Israel. But Jesus did not come from heaven to be their king. He came from heaven to be their savior. Finally, all the people left, and then Jesus went up into the mountain alone to pray. There up on the mountain in the darkness, God the Son began to talk with God the Father. You say, if Jesus is God, then why did he pray? Would he not have been talking to himself? Remember that God is a Trinity, 3 in 1. So God the Son talked with God the Father. You and I often in our own minds talk things over with ourselves, talking to ourselves. It's not uncommon for us. So it should not seem uncommon that God the Son would talk things over with God the Father. What did Jesus talk to God the Father about that night? We really don't know because the Bible doesn't tell us. On another occasion, however, we know that he talked with God the Father about the day when he, the Son, will go to Calvary to give his life for the sins of all of us, mankind. And he prayed for those who would become the sheep of his pasture. As Jesus continued praying that night, the stars came out and the night wore on. And while Jesus was praying on the mountain, the disciples were rowing hard in their little boat, hoping they would soon cover the 3 or 4 miles that lay between them and the opposite shore. For a while, all went well. But when the boat was out in the middle of the sea, a violent storm suddenly swept across the lake. Terrific winds dashed huge waves against the boat, rocking it and turning it in every direction. The disciples rowed with all their might, but they couldn't make any headway at all against the strong winds. The boat kept twisting and tossing in the boiling sea, and it was impossible for it to plow through that storm. It looked as if they would be lost at sea. The disciples feared for their very lives. Jesus continued praying on the mountain. Although he was not in the boat with his disciples, he knew they were afraid and needed him in the storm. He knew all about that difficulty and the trouble they were having in the dark, with the wind and the water raging. Because he loved them and cared for them, he determined to go to them in the storm. He left the mountain and came down to the shore of the lake. He didn't have a boat, but he didn't need a boat. He just started walking across the sea on top of the water. In the middle of the storm, the disciples saw the figure of a person coming toward them, walking on the water. The disciples were terrified, for they thought no human being could walk on the water. It must be the death angel that had come to them, they thought. So they were scared to death, and they screamed in their fright, "It's a ghost!" Through the roaring storm, they heard the comforting and assuring words, "Be not afraid, it is I." It was the voice of Jesus. They couldn't believe their eyes or ears. But how could Jesus be out there on the water with no boat under him? Why, this person was walking on top of the water. The person out on the water moved closer to the boat. Now they could see him clearly. Yes, indeed, it was the Lord. All the disciples were thrilled. Jesus had come to them in their great need. Peter was especially thrilled. Why, Jesus was walking on top of the water as smoothly as if it were glass. Peter's faith grew, and he thought, if Jesus has the power to walk on the water, then he has the power to make me walk on the water also. I'm going to ask him if I can come to him on the water. Peter knew that if Jesus had enough power to walk on the water, that he certainly could also give him the same power. So Peter called out, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you on the water." Jesus called out, "Come, Peter." The other disciples watched as Peter climbed over the side of the boat and began walking on the water toward Jesus. It took faith on such a night to go to Jesus with the sea so rough, but Peter had that faith as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus. His faith was in the creator of the seas and the hills and the whole universe. And when faith comes, fear goes away. "This is wonderful," thought Peter as he took his first step out on the water. "I'm walking on the water just like Jesus. Hey, all you disciples, look at me. This is fantastic. This is real deep water underneath, and those waves are terribly big. This is quite some storm out here on the water. Look at me, people." As Peter began looking around at the churning sea, he thought, what if one of those mountainous waves knocks me over and I can't keep my footing? This was a very disturbing thought, and Peter began to doubt. He was becoming weak and limp with fear. At that very moment, when the ray of doubt entered his heart, Peter began to sink. "Lord, save me!" he shouted frantically. In a flash, Jesus reached out his hands and lifted Peter up out of the water. As he did so, Jesus said to Peter, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt me?" Jesus helped Peter get back up on his feet, and together they walked on the water to the boat. They climbed into the boat with the other disciples. Immediately as they got in the boat, the wind stopped blowing and the sea became very calm. From the raging storm, the sea had now switched to a perfect calm. It was almost unbelievable. The disciples sat there amazed and awestruck at the miracle they had just seen. Jesus and Peter walked to the boat on top of the water, and the raging storm had become a perfect calm. Their fears were now all gone. The next thing the disciples knew, they looked up and they were at the shoreline near the city of Capernaum. Why, the whole thing had been a miracle from the beginning to the end. Falling on their knees before Jesus, they worshiped him, exclaiming, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Have you made Jesus the Lord of your life? Have you fully trusted in Jesus? If not, why not do it today?